In one of my previous videos, I did a collaboration with Mods where I did a build in their MM300 case. Originally, because I couldn't get hold of the 2017 62 mass dial, I went ahead with a newer one, and I wasn't sure when I looked at the listing whether or not it was a black dial or a brown dial because of the lighting in their pictures, so I played it safe and bought a grey dial so that I didn't end up with a brown dial that I didn't want to use because it didn't turn out to be black. Of course, I later found out that they were black dials, but I already had a grey one, so I used that one in the build. It actually didn't turn out too bad, and the grey dial with the 62 mass hands actually didn't look half bad in the MM300 case with this sort of angular lug tips that it has, which is one of the reasons I love the stylings of the MM300 and the MM200 cases. But when I did the big swap after actually finding a 2017 62 mass dial to do the original build I wanted to do, it was relegated to a standard SKX007 style case. And so, after looking on AliExpress to see some of the new aftermarket cases they had, I came across this case, which is essentially an MM200 case, and when I discovered this, I couldn't get over the price. So, here it is. We're going to unbox this and take a look at the case to see, does it stack up? I'm going to compare it to the OEM case that I bought, which was £151 and change, which is, you know, pretty far from less than 40 quid. So this aftermarket option might be a really good choice for those with a more constrained budget and still want a high quality watch. And we're going to determine today whether or not this is actually any good compared to the OEM version. And I've also got a Heimdallr bracelet that I bought that was designed for an MM300 case, which didn't fit the Mods case very well, so I just had it sitting in my watch parts box. We're going to see if it fits this case. I honestly don't know if it's going to fit, but if it does, that's a plus because I don't have to find and buy another bracelet to fit this case if it turns out to be any good. So let's get this unboxed and have a look at it before we potentially take the internals out of that SKX007 case and swap them into this one and size a new stem for it. An MM200 case for less than 40 quid. Let's compare it to the OEM one, shall we? That's pretty spot on. Wow. Even down to the detail on the bezel. Wow. So obviously this one, the OEM one, has the decorated case back, whereas this one just has a plain case back. But then again, this one was £150, this one was less than £40. How's the bezel action on it? Oh. Yeah. Nice and stiff, or should I say nice and firm, but that's definitely the same as the Heimdallr was, the wire retention rather than the click ring that the Seikos used, but still that feels pretty good to turn. It's even got drilled lugs, which is nice. So the idea is that's going to go in here. The font of this bezel actually mimics the original more so than this aftermarket option here. If you look at the difference, the font is wider. I actually like the font on this aftermarket one, but this imitation one here is actually not too bad. It matches the OEM version quite nicely. Yeah, wow. So although the bezel is not the most premium, that's pretty nice. That's even using at least a domed sapphire, at least if not double dome. I'll be able to confirm that once I get the movement inside. But that, you know what? for less than 40 quid. That's pretty cool. Hopefully my Heimdallr bracelet fits this, because then I don't have to buy another bracelet. So why don't we find out? There we are, it's gone in. That actually fits the MM300 bracelet, the Heimdallr one, shown here. Let's see how it wears. Yeah. Wow. It's not bad. I will need to put it up one micro adjust, but if you look at that side by side, that's pretty spot on with the OEM. Wow. And the bezel insert does come with some pre-applied adhesive, so we don't have to worry about that. Not too shabby at all. Let's get this in here. Let's get this out of here first. Are these crowns compatible? It does screw on, but it feels a bit weird. So yeah. This is not compatible with regular SKX crowns. I didn't expect it to be, just thought I would test it. So we can pop this back on here. That is bizarre. It's because the bracelet. It's because of the bracelet. How unfortunate is that? I've got to take the bracelet off. So it's not stiff at all. It's just the bracelet that's in the way. Comes off easily once the bracelet's out of the way. Take this. Let's make sure there's no... Nothing interfering with the second hand, that's good. Does it fit? Okay. Yes, it does fit the SKX 007 case. There's a tiny gap that maybe the gasket would not allow to be a problem, but I don't trust it. So we're not going to risk that. We're just going to use the supplied plain case back, which is still decent enough. We'll say 6.62. Gosh, that's quite a lot to take off, isn't it? So we've made a mark there. Put it on the black mark. That screws up pretty good. Believe it or not, even though I was reserved in cutting some off, that's too short. Here's another one. Let's try again. This better be right, because you don't get another chance at this. You haven't got another stem. That's already in. Yeah, that one's too long, so we need to shorten that a little bit. Hey, too long is better than too short. Still too long. And we just take our stem here, stick it in the epoxy. Just glue it on. Because this vise that I've got here doesn't get very tight because it's cheap. I'm going to grab it with the pliers, just pinch, clamp down as hard as I can to just finish that off. There. Let's get it back in the watch. There we are. So, let's get this screwed down. Let's make sure it's still functioning. Yeah. Lovely. Still winds the watch. There. Nice. And then we're going to pop the bezel insert in. Here's an SKX007 bezel insert. I didn't like this one because the way they've etched the numbers in is they just look bold and smudgy. Doesn't look very good. They're too thick. The print isn't sharp enough. But what would it look like with a black insert? So that's what it would look like. It doesn't look half bad. However, this is an SKX007 insert. It doesn't fit. That won't go in. So if you thought maybe you could use an SKX007 insert with this MM200 case, you'd be wrong. Just like the real thing, this one's loom pip is just sort of inserted in there. It might be glued in, but it might not. Just like the original, which fell out on me when I took the bezel out to realign it. Anyway, here we go. That looks aligned to me. Yeah, gosh, you can feel that wire retention is definitely not the same as a click spring. At least it's nice and firm though. There. To my eye, that looks good. Let's get the bracelet back on it. This is a bit of a funny one, this. That's in. That's in as well. There we are. There we are. Yes, it is a bit weird when you look at it from the side. Look at the size difference for this bracelet. Then again, I could take these and grind them down on the machine if I really wanted to. They are way larger than they need to be. But it doesn't make the watch any less comfortable, at least from my initial wearing. Let's take this off. There we are. Yeah. Much better. Double dome sapphire. So there it is, the finished build, which I think really is a salvage of secondary choices. You know, the dial and hands that I picked for this were never my first choices, and so when they were relegated to that SKX case, they didn't quite look at home in that case. And I think this one, the angular lug tips of this just absolutely, they just look awesome. I say that all the time, absolutely awesome. But I do think this looks really cool. And I've got to say, this case for less than 40 quid is insanely good value for money when you consider that it's a chunky SPB 185 case. And in terms of its accuracy to the original, I mean, when I hold them side by side, it's dangerously close to the original. In fact, the main difference in terms of quality is the way that bezel is attached to the case. Obviously with the OEM, we've got that nice click ring underneath, and the bezel just feels a little bit, well, a lot more premium when you rotate it, whereas this one here is just using that retention wire that you can feel it. It feels like a cheaper motion, but in its credit, I will say that the actual bezel action is nice and firm and matches the original, at least in that aspect, because the OEM one here is very firm to rotate the bezel as well, and so they match. And in terms of the actual design of the bezel, like the gear shapes all around the edge of it, that pattern is replicated on the aftermarket case, I mean, as far as I can see, perfectly. Let's do the old ASMR of the bezel insert here. You can hear it. That sounds like the cheaper mechanism, whereas if you listen to the OEM version here, yeah. Absolutely no comparison at all. The OEM one wins out. The actual brushing and polishing of this aftermarket case as well is absolutely spot on. Like, again, if you don't want to fork out 150 quid for the OEM case and you'd rather save money and go for this aftermarket option, it's incredible value for money. And if you want to do an MM200 build and you don't care about the case being OEM or not, I can highly recommend this. And another reason that I can highly recommend it is that it fits the Heimdallr MM300 bracelet. Now yes, when you look at it from the side, the end lugs do protrude lower than the thickness of the case, but hilariously, given that it's an aftermarket bracelet and an aftermarket case, this is one of the most comfortable watches I now own. The smoothness and finishing of the Heimdallr bracelet is exceptionally comfortable on the wrist, and despite the sort of hard edges on the actual end lugs themselves, the case back protrudes just enough that when it sits on the wrist, and I've got a 6-inch wrist, it doesn't dig in anywhere. The OEM one here does dig into my wrist a bit, and it can be uncomfortable at times, but this combination here, the Heimdallr bracelet and this aftermarket MM200 case, is insanely comfortable. It just feels smooth on the wrist, and that's a plus for me. That's just another reason to go for this. If you want to do yourself an MM200 build, you're not bothered about whether or not the case or the bracelet or anything's OEM, you just want it to look cool and be comfortable and be decent quality. I can't speak to the water resistance of this because I don't have the tools to test it, but it says 200 meters water resistant. It has a screw down crown with a gasket on it. It's a single gasket, but it's a fairly decent chunky one, and it comes with a gasket for the case back. The threads on the back of it are the same as the SKX cases. I did screw a display case back onto it, but there was a very slight gap on there, so honestly, if you don't want to take your chances, just leave the original case back on this. So all in all, I'm going to say this is a win-win. If you just want to get a Heimdallr bracelet and this MM200 case on AliExpress, you're going to save yourself a heap of money and you're still going to have an absolutely awesome watch. So that's going to do it for this one. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.